My name is Christina Hartley. I am Executive Director of Alumni and Family Relations at RISD, and I want to welcome you to this panel of alumni talking about their experiences with pivoting during a pandemic. We've invited alumni who have varying backgrounds and experiences to share with us today. And I know it's going to be a really interesting conversation. So I'll get us started, I'll get us started by introducing our moderator, Ashleigh Axios. She graduated from RISD in 2008 with a degree in graphic design. Ashleigh is a speaker, strategic creative, and an advocate for design's ability to break barriers and create positive social change. She is Chief Experience Officer and a partner at Coforma, a digital consultancy and design firm that crafts creative solutions and builds technology products that support communities. She's also the chair of the board of the AIGA, which is a professional association for design. Prior to her current roles, Axios formed and led the in-house creative agency at Automatic, served as the creative director and a digital strategist in the Obama White House, served as president of AIGA Washington, D.C., and much more. So take it away, Ashleigh.
Thanks, Christina. Hi, all. Thank you for joining us today. It's a pleasure to help lead a dialogue on a really important topic, and I kind of get the opportunity to help set the stage and get us going. So first, let's just acknowledge that it's 2020, which is a year that has felt like a lifetime to many of us. So much of our lives and our work, our communities, and our surroundings have changed. A global pandemic has forced challenges and revealed opportunities in how we work, where we work, what we show of our surroundings. Welcome to my home office. And for many, how we take care of ourselves and one another. So even industries that have been really resistant to change over time, to working in a distributed workplace and letting people kind of work from where they need to, have largely now shifted to a remote first model of working. And I think they're not alone in kind of taking this weird, strange opportunity that we've been presented and finding ways to surprise even themselves about how they can adapt, and as individuals, as companies, as entities. I'm gonna just highlight some things I think we've all seen, but museums and galleries are embracing digital strategy and engagement to fulfill their missions and find a way to, I'll use quotes here, but keep their doors open. They're also kind of creating different types of physical spaces, as are many other locations, finding ways to allow for distancing and physical access. Restaurants and the service industry has shifted outside and have found so many new innovative ways to get product out there and to engage with their customers and innovative delivery models. Entertainment industry, from theater to public exhibitions, they've also pivoted to different types of streaming and engagement, collaboration activities that were once on the fringe are now these kind of normative actions that we expect forced by the conditions of the pandemic. And I think artists and designers are in each of these spaces and many others that I have not named. And we're shifting with the changing tides, but we're also in some cases creatively helping drive them, noticing things about what's working and not, and through dialogue, sharing the best practices and tips and helping, hopefully this will be the case today, guide others and one another in a healthy path forward. But I'd also be, I think, pretty remiss if I talked about the pandemic alone, although I know that's the topic of the panel discussion today. So on top of the pandemic, we're experiencing a lot of other things at the same time. We're experiencing the effects of an environmental crisis that's causing double hurricanes and national wildfires and extreme weather events, and that affects how we're responding and engaging. We're experiencing the effects of racial injustice and a caste system that has always existed in this country, but that has really come to a head with the recent murders of George Floyd and many others. And I think we're seeing and experiencing an awakening of awareness about issues of white supremacy and justice and dismantling of systems that aren't working for people. And I think many are experiencing the very real and layered pains of loss that come with the losses related to the pandemic, that come with the forced shifts in how we operate, the political and cultural clashes that are happening, and just the trends in the news of every single day. It feels like there's something different this year. I think, don't want y'all to go, we all knew that. That's don't bring us down, Ashleigh. But I think from all of this, from the chaos of broken systems around us, we're also living in a time with a great awareness of and interest in utilizing design and creativity for social, environmental, health, and civic causes. And we can celebrate this. We're seeing, again, designers and creatives shifting their companies and adapting and helping drive change from within. These are things that we can celebrate together. So it's an extremely complex time. Now I'm not touching on everything here. I'm going to try to just keep this part fairly short, but today we're discussing pivoting during a pandemic, but this is a nuanced and layered time, and we can't just talk about the pandemic out of the context of the things like the rise of political and social tensions. So with that, what I'm going to do from here is introduce each panelist and invite them to share a little bit about what this journey has been like for each of them and the ways that RISD has prepared them, and more, the things that are on their minds. It's going to be some structure and just how I go through and ask some questions, and then some open Q&A, some questions from all of you towards the end as well. So if you've got questions, start to note them. If there's something that we don't go into that you're really curious about, please feel free to bring it up a little bit later on, and we'll do what we can to get through each of the pieces today. So first up, it's my pleasure to introduce Tiffany Cooper. Tiffany is an art director and Miami native working in New York City. She graduated from the Rhode Island School of Design with a BFA in film animation and video in 2012. Being a jack of all trades, she has multiple titles throughout the years, from video editor and shooter, animator, motion designer, art director, and more. She's currently working full-time as an art director at a global ad agency. At her full-time job, she enjoys concepting and creating compelling motion graphics, animation, video, and design for multiple brands such as Chips Ahoy, Tempur-Pedic, Olay, Comcast Xfinity, Excedrin, and many more. In her free time, she focuses on, creating and directing music videos, animation, motion graphics for artists, and has done so for Mini Coops, RP, and others. So Tiffany, thank you for joining us.
Hi, it's my pleasure. Thank you for having me.
So to start, just tell us briefly about your RISD student experience in a nutshell. What was it like for you?
Well, for me, it was really good and a way for me to grow. Growing up, I was this shy, quiet kid, and in ways I still am. But at RISD, I was able to get into leadership roles. I was an RA. I worked in a lot of the offices. At the time, it was called Office of Multicultural Affairs. I also worked at Res Life office. And then I was a TA, teacher's assistant for several classes within FAV. So a lot of just being in a lot of those roles helped me to be able to like lead and grow and break out of that shell I had. So,
Yeah,
yeah.
absolutely. And when you left, I know, we're talking a little bit about your experience so far at RISD. When you left and started your career, what was your journey like? Did you go right into the combination of titles and roles that showed up in your bio?
No, there's actually a lot more roles that I took. When I graduated, just the industry and financially, I believe we were in a recession. Um, it was kind of like a smaller recession than 2008, but I, I believe it was just like we were coming out of it, but there was still like limited jobs available and roles. So I kind of did multiple jobs. I was security at the Met at one point, Metropolitan Museum of Art, which was great. I got to meet other artists there. And that job actually helped me be able to become stable enough to do freelance work and build my portfolio. Yeah.
So, well, it sounds a little bit like, you graduated in time. I'm familiar with this too, where things didn't feel like they were the normal that you were promised maybe when, or you thought you would go into when you left school. So maybe you had some pivots early on too. With that in mind, what's one way the pandemic and this year has like affected you or caused you to pivot, and how has that compared to your kind of earlier pivots and explorations as you left RISD?
Well, I am one of the I guess I'm more lucky in a sense where my company is already sort of digital in some of the ways that we communicate. We use Slack, we use email, Google Slides to create presentations. But so the company that I'm currently at right now, it was easier to transition into working remotely, as we had other systems set up as well, like a joint server where everyone could access files. But the biggest change was, well, my equipment, what I have to work with in terms, like at work, I had two big screens. Now I'm working on a small laptop. Also at work, I had a workspace. At home, I don't necessarily have a workspace, and I had to figure out, that. And then another thing is just reminding myself to take breaks at work. You naturally take breaks when you walk to the bathroom, or you have to go out to get lunch, or any of those other things. But right, like at home, you're here, so you kind of have to remind yourself to stretch your legs, exercise, get up, look out the window, look far away, all these other things. And I at first it was really difficult to kind of like wake up on time and actually get dressed and just not feel like, because of the pandemic and a lot of other things, that, you know, my world wasn't ending. I don't know if that makes sense, but
Yeah,
yeah.
it sounds like lost a sense maybe of the normalcy, and so had to kind of build it in a different way. I'm curious, and we'll kind of go on and go around with the rest of our panelists before we begin discussion. But I'm curious if there like specific tools that ended up helping you kind of schedule your breaks and get your time. Remember to kind of set a sense of normalcy back into your day.
I kind of, in terms of tools, I mean, there's a lot of just meditations and yogas and things that I have personally been doing along with my fiance. We've created, and this took a pretty long while to do, if I'm honest. We created a schedule in which we wake up at a certain time, we do yoga, we decompress, and then we figure out what the news is saying, because that's another thing. There's always something in the news now, which can sometimes throw off our days, depending on what it is. But we try to keep that after we actually wake up and are able to communicate with each other. Yeah.
Great, thanks. So look forward to chatting a little bit more, but it's my pleasure now to introduce Brandon Kim. Brandon is the co-founder of Brevitē, a direct-to-consumer brand that creates backpacks for photographers. He received his Master's of Industrial Design from Rhode Island School of Design. Brandon, thank you for joining us.
Yeah, thanks for having me on.
Tell us a little bit about your, same questions, but tell us a little bit about your RISD student experience.
Yeah, so I was a little bit of a black sheep at RISD. I was much more interested in how design and business intersected, which doesn't always jive with RISD, but ultimately what I found was, what RISD is allowed me to, really flourish within my own career, which I was pleased about. My experience at RISD was, I assume, similar to everyone else's. It's like a lot of trying to figure out what you want, and you're staying broad, but you've got your weird quirks on what you love. But ultimately came out of the other side really having a firm understanding of what part of design I love. And now being in my own career, being in a position where nobody can pull the wool over our eyes when it comes to design and product and how we want to handle it within our own company.
That's great. I mean, it sounds like you had some kind of challenges in that, but it helped you grow into a stronger designer and business person on the other end. I'm curious to hear, what was your experience like leaving RISD, and kind of how did you make the jump from RISD to Brevitē? What was in between? I'm sure there are at least a few steps there.
Yeah, so I think something to note about Brevitē is we run it for years, maybe like 6 or 7 years now. And so we started in undergrad and then ran it through RISD. And while my brothers were working, they did it part-time. I did it part-time. It was an interesting thing. But transitioning from a student designer designing for the classroom to a designer who designs for production was a leap. It was interesting. So you take a lot of those weird exercises and processes that you learn as a student, and then you try to translate that over to production. And that was, it wasn't as difficult as RISD was, but it was difficult to say the least. I spent about 2 or 3 months last year living in Vietnam, working at the factory to understand how better to design for production. So, just going from factory to factory in China and Vietnam and trying to really figure out how it all works. And so, that isn't the easiest thing to do, but ultimately, I felt in a very strong position, understanding what I want and how, the level of quality I want in my product and brand.
Well, that's really great. And kudos for going through school while also developing your product and a company. That's quite a bit to handle at once. I know, RISD kids, as I like to say, like to balance things. We heard it from Tiffany as well with, I think you mentioned 5, Tiffany, types of engagements with the school as part of your introduction. Brandon, what's one way that the pandemic and this year has kind of affected you, or if you'd rather, your business?
It's been interesting. So when the pandemic first started, we signed some beautiful new office in Brooklyn, and then we couldn't use it, and then our business, took a steep decline of like 50% overnight, and then it rebounded, and suddenly the business has grown in multiples this year, and we've seen significant growth. Part of it's a good foundation, and the other part of it's cheaper ad costs because the airlines aren't spending, hotels aren't spending, and travel isn't spending. So we're not totally sure, but it's been interesting. You know, I think, you know, suddenly our office isn't the headquarters, it's more of a New York studio. And that's how you look at it. You're not getting value by using it every day. If you close a couple international deals there, you know, once or twice a year, you know, you can justify it. Or, you know, how we're hiring people and choosing to manage people has become a lot looser. You know, we can hire remote, we can hire very interesting, talented people, and they don't have to be with us. We don't have to be there. That's really cool. You know, we can follow our partners wherever our partners need to go. You know, we can ultimately end up wherever we want to end up. We don't have to stay in New York, and it's been very freeing. I mean, there's a lot of hurt going around, and we recognize that, so we're very fortunate right now. But for us, you know, it's like I don't imagine us ever going back to the office full time. No one seems to want to, and it doesn't seem like we have to. We're just as productive as before, if not more. And we all have time for hobbies and all the things that we want to be able to do. So, yeah, I think that's kind of how the pandemic's been for our Brevitē.
That's great. It's really encouraging to hear that, because that isn't what we're getting in the stories that we're getting everywhere in the news and from everybody. So to hear the complexity and the variety of how the pandemic has affected folks is really great. All right, well, we'll come back around, Brandon, so sit tight. And last but certainly not least, it's my pleasure to introduce Bruce Werfel. Bruce graduated from RISD with a bachelor's degree in architecture in 1989. After graduation, he moved to the Jersey Shore and started working on summer homes on Long Beach Island. He then fell into a little-known niche in architecture, designing science and technology spaces, and has been doing it for 23 years. This specialty has taken him across the globe and into numerous interesting projects. He designed a tuberculosis or TB lab at the Nigerian Institute of Pharmaceutical Research and Development, and had a lab projects at the US military in Bangkok, Thailand, Cairo, and Egypt, in addition to projects for major pharmaceutical companies around the US. He designed a methamphetamine lab, legal, I think we're gonna hear about here, and training center for the DEA at their facility at Quantico Marine Corps Base. He's a lead project architect for the FDA headquarters laboratory in White Oak, Maryland, and has done projects for CDC and NIH, completing his first SARS lab in 2004 for NIH. Currently at CRB in Maryland, Bruce is the architectural group leader and has worked on numerous COVID-19 facilities. Thank you, Bruce.
Thank you.
From testing labs to manufacturing areas, as well as Operation Warp Speed projects, which sounds very important. Bruce, thank you for joining us.
Thank you.
So same questions here, but just tell us, yeah, again, what was your RISD experience like?
Well, I think I was a little bit unusual in that I wanted to be an architect when I was younger. My father was an interior designer, and he let me design a synagogue interior when I was like 12 or 13 years old, working for him one summer. And I was hooked on architecture. So I knew I wanted to go to be an architect. I knew I wanted to be at RISD. And it was a great experience. Met my wife there. We're coming up on our 30-year anniversary in a couple of weeks. So RISD was a good time for me. I knew exactly what I wanted. I was not the best at life drawing. I still remember that vividly. That's okay. You're an architecture. It doesn't matter. So it was a good time. I have a lot of friends. I'm still very close with them. And it taught me a lot. It really, excuse me, taught me how to problem solve, and just taught me in general how to prepare myself for the career that I chose. Always how to talk about your designs and how to be forceful about what you want it to be, and listen to the client and get their input. It was a great experience for me. I was very, very happy.
Well, that's incredible. I'm curious about the being forceful part. I want to hear a little bit more about how that shows up, but maybe that'll come up a bit more in discussion. So what was your journey like post graduation? Did you get right into some of what we heard about in your bio, or was there a bit of a journey in between?
Well, I too graduated during a recession. So when it was, exactly, it wasn't that bad. I, unlike my friends, I had a job for the entire time. So I was very, very lucky with that. But I started doing summer homes. And when I graduated, I was going to design these great things in these great buildings. And I started working on these fabulous homes for people, multi-million-dollar homes in the 80s and 90s. I was like, this is great. And then I had children and reality set in, and I had to find a job in a different location. So when I went up to northern New Jersey, I found a company. I was hired by a company that does science and technology. And that's what really got me started. And I had to find a new job because of my children. And then I started working for this S&T company. They hired me because of my, I was doing I did a lot of restaurants and millwork and high-end, because of the high-end stuff. I had a lot of millwork and design of high-end spaces. So I was hired as a millwork expert in this S&T company, and I just grew into a lab planner. And now, originally I was doing research and technology spaces, and then now I am doing almost solely pharmaceutical manufacturing areas. We still do some labs. In fact, we're doing a COVID lab for NIH right now, in addition to the building that I actually worked on in 2004. So it's taken me a while. It's an interesting journey.
That's great. There's so much more I want to dig into. I'm trying to, with each of you, hold on some of these so we can get into it with discussion with the whole group, but try and keep to the same question. So what's one way the pandemic and this year has affected you and your work, Bruce?
The change in, as you can tell, I am old, the change in just the way we work. I used to be, interns had to be in the office. You had to learn from the master architect to tell them how to do things. Switching over to video has been a real challenge for me. It's been a challenge for my employees, but the first couple of months in, it was hard. Now we're getting into the rhythm of it, and it's working out fine. So I'm not sure if we're ever going to fully go back to the office. Yeah, we're definitely going to be telecommuting more often than I would have said would have been acceptable 6 months ago. Yeah, so it changed my perspective. It really has changed the way I used to just walk over, draw a little sketch, and walk away. Now I have to talk to people more. I have to show them tell them what's in my head more. It changed the way I work, and it's changing the way that my interns and the junior architects are working as well. And I think it's for the better. But.
Oh, that's great. I'm impressed that you have active internships too. It sounds. I'm gonna open it up to the group a little bit here. I don't know if we have the controls to go to the full grid or see some other from the group, but I'm curious to hear from each of you just a little bit more about what it's been like having like partnerships and working closely with clients. What adjustments have you made specific to that in this past year?
I'm not a good one to ask that of, because all of my projects were essential. So I was still going out to meetings, going out to visit people. I had masks on. We were sitting 6 feet apart, but it was almost business as usual for a bunch of these places.
Yeah.
So probably I'm not the best for that.
Well, Brandon, I'll kind of spin it a little bit and put that one to you and say, you were talking about traveling to Vietnam and being on site there. Do you still have some of those same types of interactions? And what does that look like now that you're remote? And you're saying that you're likely going to stay remote as a company moving forward.
Yeah, so all the extra time has been great for all those strategy level exercises and for really looking at our current processes. And so like flying out to Vietnam 4 times a year and living out there sometimes for months at a time isn't the most efficient thing. It's good to do, and like it really allows you to get in there like really deep with the factory, but you know, as far as like time well spent. You know, being jet lagged for like 6 weeks at a time is not ideal. So it's really forced us to become more efficient with our factories and how we communicate with them, and all of our partners in general. I mean, like, I think everybody has Slack and stuff, but we've become much tighter knit with a lot of our vendors and our suppliers. We've become, you know, a lot more communal in the way that everybody is communicating. So, you know, the pandemic's been it's really forced us to figure out how do you maintain those relationships and nurture them digitally. And fortunately, it seems to be working pretty well. So can't complain on that front. So, though I don't really like having like 10, 11, 12 p.m. calls with the factory, like, you know, multiple times a week. Don't love those.
Absolutely. That's a valid part of the change, right? Just working and adjusting to so many different time zones. I know for me, a good portion of my team has shifted around. I had somebody who was in upstate New York, and it's like, well, if I can be out of the country and I quarantine, why not? Who has shifted and is living in Europe. She took all the necessary precautions, but I am also noticing, I'm wondering if you're noticing this too, but folks moving outside of city centers, moving outside of, and open this up to everybody, shifting kind of who you're living with because you're not seeing folks as much in the office. Do you all have any experience with that individually, as well as how is that changing your work dynamics?
I can go. Our entire team left New York, which was interesting. So us included. And then as we've begun moving back, some have moved back to New York. Some have moved out to like very outer boroughs and outer towns and like are commuting in because they're, you know, you can drive now in New York. And then you just have not come back at all. And there's no problem with it at all, which is cool. So that's been our experience thus far.
Tiffany?
Yeah, so for me, it's since it's like a bigger agency, so like our clients have they're some of the clients I have are like just not in the Eastern time zone, but and they're also on different phases of, you know, the opening or closing and all that. So they've actually been in the office for most of the time, but like most of my coworkers, I know like some have like left New York and just like went to, you know, just out of state, but a few have came back, and since we're all virtual, you know, you can be anywhere really. And I know my company as a whole, they have like a set like work from home remote time in mind. Basically, they've been, I don't know, they've been reassessing every time they get up to the set date that they have, as to whether or not, you know, more people can come into the office or not. Because right now they're open at 25% capacity, but it's optional. They're not making anyone come in, which is great. Yeah, and as Brandon mentioned, I feel like my company also has said similar things. It's like we're not for certain that we'll go back to being completely like fully in the office. Like the, you know, option of working remotely will stick around, and we'll see to what capacity, but I'm excited for that.
Absolutely. So I'm very curious to dig in, Bruce, to hear a little bit more, because we're talking about pivoting during the pandemic, and one of your projects is COVID-19 related. So
yeah. It's 4 of them. Yeah.
So, you know, it seems like it has directly affected the type of work that you're doing. Can you tell us a little bit about that?
Well, I was doing pharmaceutical manufacturing facilities, so it's not really that different. But what has changed was the speed that everybody wants things. We're doing a project now that the Operation Warp Speed won. We were given the job in June. They were buying special equipment that was coming from Austria that was going to get here in October 15th. They needed the building up and ready to accept this equipment. So we took on a design build challenge to get it up and ready for them. But it was unbelievably fast. And for everybody on my team, and my team, the design team and the construction team, it was just an incredible struggle to get it to the point where we could have it up. And everybody knew the urgency of it. So it was actually, that's, I guess one of the things that has changed with this is that it's more teamwork with the contractors and the architects. We're not at loggerheads. We're all working together to get this done for COVID. So it has sort of increased the camaraderie of our projects, but which is a good change. Hopefully it stays this way, but just the speed. And I on one of these COVID projects, we're getting emails from clients 6:30, 7 o'clock at night that they wanted to have a meeting at 9 p.m. So it's that kind of, so we need it now. So that was the struggle, but like I said, everybody knew that we had a common goal, so it worked out okay. But it was pushing everybody to the limits.
Yeah. Thank you for sharing. I want to connect the dots a little bit more between that RISD experience and what you're doing now. I know we had you share a little bit about your journey in between, but whoever wants to go next, really, what was something that you learned unique to RISD that you have been able to apply, whether specific to this past year and the time of the pandemic or in between, that has helped you with picking up on some things I'm already hearing? You know, Bruce producing work at really high kind of speeds and on demand, or you know, working with different types of kind of technology. Is there anything that stood out from your RISD education has been really empowering and supportive of your kind of development and adaptation?
I can say that I don't have a specific point your finger at thing, but I do know that the RISD experience that I got, and another one of my friends who ended up being head of quality at a different architecture firm also went to RISD. So I was head of quality in my office. He was head of quality for another firm. For tech artsy school, they produced a bunch of people that were super technically oriented. And I don't know why, because I thought I was artsy, but now it turns out I am super technical when it comes to architecture.
Makes you a good partner to those technical, to the engineers and the folks that you're working with.
Well, actually, that's a good point. But the firms that I really shined at were architects and engineers together, where I liked the camaraderie and the everybody working together for a common goal. But all I know is it really prepared me for the general stuff that helped me with my career. Yeah.
I would second that. I would second that technical bit. I think that is a strong point, and I would, you know, heavily sympathize with it. I think RISD has a tendency of either attracting or producing people with an unbelievable capacity to grind things out, and Brown University seems to as well. And so I've found that is consistent between all Brown and RISD students and alumni that I meet. And, you know, it's made it much easier to work with them. It's made it easier to hire them. And, you know, I honestly don't know where it comes from, but it's a trait that, you know, is consistent among Bruce and Tiffany and Ashley, and I would say myself. And I think it's probably the thing that has gotten me the furthest along in my own career.
So yeah, I'd also like to second everything that Brandon and Bruce have said as well. For me, it was also learning how to multitask. With RISD, you know, there has a very rigorous course schedule. Um, and, you know, going into it from high school where it's not as great. I don't know. It could, depending on where you come from in terms of your high school and what you were doing there. There is a big difference, you know. Um, but I feel like it prepared me to be able to like multitask and like divvy out tasks and prioritize, you know, what needs to be done faster and or you know what takes more time, which is very helpful right now. Let me tell you, in my career. Yeah, and as well as working with people and um, having that work ethic that just I don't know that RISD students seem to have, and the passion and actually just the love for the work that you're doing and like just making sure it's your best. I feel like that's straight across the board. At least my experience of like RISD and when I was there, and like and current alumni that I know, um, yeah, you just give it your best work like at anything you do. So.
Thank you. I would agree with all of you and just kind of add on to that and say, I feel like the standards are really high at RISD and you're given like pushes and a community of really high achievers, but you're not given the answers. So you're filling in the blanks and learning to seek out where the answers are and partner where you can. And for me, I discovered kind of early on at RISD that because I wanted the design to be good and nobody was going to give me the copy for the piece I was designing, for example, I had to get really good at writing and editing because it just didn't look right. And it wasn't a good design if it didn't have some of those elements in it. And being somebody who's passionate about causes and the type of subject matter and wanting to do things that would make a difference. At RISD, I started kind of experimenting with doing research into the topics when I was given an open-ended project, right, of designing something like a stamp and going, well, okay, how can I make this my own and how can I make it something that is really represents a passion or an issue area that I care about, and digging deep in and doing research. And that has all enabled me to shine. I wouldn't have been able to work in the Obama White House if I couldn't on the fly do some, you know, copywriting, which is supportive of all the work we did in, you know, State of the Union slides and research, and learn to look up my own stats and stuff from Department of Labor for communications. So I echo all that you're kind of saying, and also just, I think there's such a well-roundedness. So speed and being a high achiever, and that sense of kind of pulling from the community around you and trying to do the best work to really shine within a group that is highly talented. Well, I don't want to go too much longer. I've got some other questions, but I would love for us to begin to take some because we've got a few coming in from the audience as well, to make sure that we're getting to some of the things that you really care to hear about as a community. So let me pick one up. We've got a couple specific to Tiffany. One from Victoria McCready. She says, I was wondering how intense the deadlines in an ad agency and music videos can be. Does this intensity ever block your sense of creativity? And did RISD give you the tools to go straight into these jobs?
Okay, yes. I'm gonna, yes, ad deadlines are intense. The music video ones seem to be more lenient just in terms of who I'm working with and like when they're, you know, release day or what they want to do with the video is. Yeah, I'm like, ooh, how did, so RISD, I'm actually looking up the question. 1 second. Oh, well, I don't know if I'm gonna get each part of the question, but RISD actually helped like prepare me just for like reaching the deadlines and stuff. Well, because, well, each week, you know, you may have an assignment due from your studio class, and you have to like get it done before the next week. And actually, sorry, RISD actually helped me to be able to stay creative because you know, you do have like projects due every week, but you have to like figure out like how to get the inspiration. And for me, it's like I'm I'm from Miami, Florida, and like the beach was there. I didn't live on the beach, but it's pretty close by, and there was a lot more like nature and things. So I would tend to, even now, like when I can, I get out and I go out in nature and I go to the beach and I like just observe what's around me. I also, and besides that, another way of inspiration is just looking at what my peers are doing and what my friends are doing, and just trying to do like creative things in terms of like playing games, or just like um, stepping away from the task at hand for a second and like taking a break and taking your mind off of it. And for me, that's how I stay being able to create, even under tough deadlines and stuff. I hope I answered the question.
I think that's a great answer. I know often it's tempting to go into deeper into the area that you're working in to get when you're focused and deadlines are really intense for inspiration. And what I'm hearing from you, Tiffany, is this like stepping aside and looking outside of the ad industry, outside of like, you know, quote unquote, the creative spaces, and looking at your surroundings to get a completely different kind of context and eye on things. And that can also like change the pace of the work too, I've found, in a way that's really valuable and counter some of the high demands being put on you from internal within the team.
Yes.
Open question to the group, whoever wants to answer. One from Rob. What initially made you attend RISD, and what were you surprised to find out once you began your studies? Kind of two-parter.
For me, it was the only school I wanted to go to. My father went to Cooper Union. I was into the arts forever, and RISD was my #1 choice. As soon as I got in, that was it. Search was over.
But you got to answer the second part of there. What were you surprised, especially if this was your dream school? What were you surprised to find out once you began your studies?
That our history class was too early in the morning on Fridays. 7 a.m. lecture, 8 a.m. lecture is way too early.
The only time you second guessed it, your decision there.
Yeah. But other than that challenge, I mean, I was truthfully, I was not prepared for the rigor of freshman year, the all-nighters, the project deadlines, that kind of stuff. Especially for me, I spent all my time drafting. The 2D projects, the 3D projects, they were all challenges for me. So freshman year was a challenge that I did not. I was like, this is going to be great, but it was hard. And then sophomore year of architecture school was just as hard in a different way.
Yeah. That's how you know you're growing, right? When you feel a little bit of the strain along the way, you're pushing yourself beyond your comfort zone. I can identify with that. I'm going to sprinkle in one of my own because I'm really curious about this. Like, how have you all, for those of you that have a mentor-mentee relationship with others, how has that adapted? Have you been able to mentor others or get mentored, just given the shift in dynamics of the past few months?
I'm happy to answer that one. I found with the mentor-mentee relationships that mentors seem to be much more open to those kinds of relationships. And of course, often they're not called that. They're just kind of like, you're just chatting with someone who's very experienced and they're being very helpful. So we've been, like, as with Growing Pains, you reach out to people who know more than you. And previously, where maybe they weren't so open to chatting, people are very open to chatting right now, which is nice. And then, giving feedback to mentees, we have more time. So we're suddenly giving back. So we found that overall, like as an organization and as partners, we have more capacity to give right now, which is interesting. And so that's reflected in the business. We're donating $150,000 of bags this year. And so that was unique in this situation. And, we found some really talented people to help us get there, which probably previously wouldn't have been possible.
That's fantastic. I know I've noticed a little bit of the same, although I have been working more, so I've got more time and less time. Time doesn't exist anymore. It's a bit of a continuum, but I do seem opened up to more dialogues and conversation. Thank you for sharing that. I'm going to take a question from two on our Q&A pod here. Has COVID changed the ways your respective industries recruit and network? And if so, do you think these will be permanent changes?
So I am proud to say we just recently hired a RISD grad, where I've never met him in person yet. I'm still a little bit uncomfortable with that. It has changed. It will change. I don't think we're going to go back to that if it's not COVID, but the working from home and that will remain. But the hiring practice, I don't know. I like to see people. I know over the video we can, but it's not the same. Yeah. But
anybody else want to chime into that one? Thank you, Bruce.
I think that in advertising, yes, the in-person meetings are definitely like better for hiring, and well, people would say they're better. I do think that you can hire like over the internet, over like Zoom and Google as well, and eventually you'll get to meet the person. But I think that my industry hasn't changed per se in terms of how they hire and how they recruit and how they look for people. We use social media, so we look for talent on there, whether or not it's they're creating their own content or they are a designer with a website. We look at everything that they can do and create. At least my specific company does. So I don't think that will necessarily change. But the in-person versus virtual, yeah.
Absolutely. Yeah. The smaller kind of procedural pieces of it will shift, but less the subject of the interviews and how those are conducted. I'll chime into this one and say, I think my business, small business, we've been thinking a lot more about like making our standards and hiring practices just much more public and being even more transparent than we were before, knowing that there are just so many factors folks are considering when they're looking for jobs. So we've been lucky enough to be able to do a little bit of hiring for contractors and full-time employees, but kind of feeling just the need to be even more transparent about what the hours are, where folks can work from, what our standards and what we're hoping to achieve as far as even our makeup as a community and how we're composed and comprised, knowing that folks are questioning and more aware of the types of institutions that they're joining. So just you know, we've had these perspectives for a little while, but we're starting to put them up on each of the job listings when they get really long, just to be as clear as possible, not knowing what folks are going through. All right, there's another great question in the Q&A pod. How do you think your personal and or professional values have changed or evolved because of COVID? It's a good one, right? It's a thinker. Oops, you're muted, Tiffany.
Well, yes, that's a thinker for sure.
You can think about it if you want another moment.
Yeah,
Don't want to put anybody on the spot. I thought you were chatting there before. I'd say for me, I don't know if this is exactly value, but I'm just more conscious of and trying to see the whole person in this scenario, which maybe came up in my last answer a little bit too. Thinking, there used to be separation between our physical spaces a little bit more, maybe not even as much in my business because we've been remote first for a little while, but we weren't always able to see all the things people had on their plate, and it's easier to have silos in the ways in which we consider people. When you're working, and that's the only thing happening. And now, I feel like I'm just so much more conscious of the, multiplicity of each person. So that is my coworker, but also a mother and an aunt and a significant other, and these, and that all matters because, the significant other could be more susceptible to COVID, and that changes what they're able to do. Children are at home more and kind of popping into Zoom calls. And so it's a real shift, and I think a really positive one, but thinking much more holistically about my team and the folks that I'm working with as individuals, instead of what probably comes from like the industrial age, this kind of easy to slip into cog in the machine thing, even if we're trying to work against it, that happens in work really easily on a day-to-day basis.
Yeah, absolutely true. I found I've asked people how they're doing more than I used to. It's where I used to be just all business, but now it's how are you? How's the family? How's everybody okay? And I don't know, I care more about them.
Yeah, and those are increasingly complex questions to answer for each of us, but they're so valuable. And you bring up a good point, Bruce, too, because this kind of connects into the mentorship point. I feel like I've been taking more, and I guess some of the other points, but I've been taking more team member one-on-one chats as well, just trying to make sure that I touch base and have a sense of what folks are going through, and remind folks of time off policies. And in the US, there's CARES Act. So, there are all sorts of things you kind of qualify for now. If you do need to kind of step away from work, that I think, business owner hat on, have to just be aware of and be extra communicative about as we move forward. And I hope folks are becoming aware too, even as employees, that you have some of these things available to you. There's a whole lot should have available to us in our economy that we don't, but there are a few things that are out there now. All right, I'll take a few more from the chat pod here. Just a kind of open-ended one. What's been your favorite design project that you've been a part of? This one was they're kind of kicked out in the pod for a few people, so I'll leave it open to any of you who wants to answer.
I worked on a project for the FDA headquarters where got to meet with almost every single director of the different branches of FDA. And the project, it was a high-rise building that they're moving from NIH's campus to their own campus. So it was couple 100,000 square foot of lab space, 30,000 square feet of BSL-3 labs, so high containment labs. It was a tremendous project, and just getting to know everybody in FDA, and that they're not these evil bureaucrats. They're the FDA people, even if they are just reviewing submissions, they still are required to work in the labs. So they do have a research protocol that they need to do in addition to their work on reviewing submissions. So getting to know them as real human people was very interesting for me.
Can absolutely relate. Another one for you, Bruce. There's this question of how in the world did you transition knowledge-wise from designing homes to designing a lab?
Well,
Yeah,
it did
what
not
were some of
happen
the
overnight.
specifics?
Yeah, did not happen overnight. Like when I started at this company, Did Labs, I was hired because of my millwork experience doing restaurants and high-end stuff. So I started doing that, and over the years, just like we were talking about before, the RISD mind, I started working on a lab project. I started researching what they were doing in that lab. So it wasn't just, here's this project. I started researching what it was going on that they were working on. And over the years, it took me to the point where, actually, 2 years ago, I was in a room with 10 people. All of them had PhDs, and they were all listening to me when I was telling them what they should be doing about their building. And I have my bachelor's degree from RISD, and these are all super smart doctors listening to me. I was like, wow, I've come up in the world.
I love that sense of collaboration. When I get to work with folks who know these brilliant, fantastic things, and I get to lend some creativity to it, but be associated with these great projects. It's when you really learn to appreciate collaboration and
Absolutely.
yeah, just the spaces we get to enter into as creatives, as designers is really incredible.
Yeah, and I'm also fascinated with what the scientists do. I know I had an hour-long conversation with the director of a malaria lab where he was telling me about the differences in DNA of different mosquitoes are bigger between mosquitoes than they are between us and elephants. And he was fascinated, I was fascinated. It was just interesting stuff. So I had no idea that this existed when I was at school. But if I knew it existed then, I would have tried for it.
I can relate. I probably would not have tried for a job at the White House, I'll be honest. It's not even on my radar. Okay, so one more question, and we'll do it popcorn style for the group. What's one tip you have for others just jumping into their careers at this time?
Mine would be use your network. Use the RISD Career Center. I know I'm constantly going back to, I'm trying to hire people. So if any of you guys are in the Washington area, let me know. So just use the people you know and use your connections and try to make new ones.
Yes, I'd also like to second on that. Yes, use your network. I got a lot of my past jobs from who I knew, and yeah, recommendations are good. You know, definitely tap into your network. And I also used the RISD Career Center like right out of school, and I got an internship through there, and I got like a summer job as well. So just think about all of your connections and networks and things, and like definitely tap into them all.
One piece of advice I got from another RISD alum was to build bigger than yourself. And I always loved that. I find that designers, and specifically designers at RISD, have an unbelievable capacity to build. And so you can build for somebody else, or you can build a lot of equity. And so I suggest that designers look to build bigger.
Great words. Thank you all so much for your time today, for both our panelists, silent applause from all of our guests who we can't hear. And thank you to all of the folks that tuned in to the conversation today. I'm sure you have more questions and are as intrigued as I am about each of the panelists. So I would encourage you, especially given some of their feedback, to reach out to them if there's something else that you would like to know. If you are fascinated by their careers and their journeys and want to see what they do next as we do. And I'll hand it over to our very own Christina Hartley.
Thank you, Ashleigh. I just want to express my thanks as well. Bruce, Branding, Tiffany, and Ashleigh, especially you for moderating today. It was a really interesting conversation. I personally have tons more questions, so you will all be hearing from me. Everyone have a great weekend, and thanks so much. Bye-bye.
Thank you. Bye.
Thank you.